I'm Jennifer Hasser with Kendor Learning, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about phonemes, graphemes, and morphemes. So this is part 2. So if you haven't seen part 1, you might want to check that one out. But first, I'd like to talk about a couple questions and comments that we had about part 1. First of all, phonemes are the sounds of our language. So in English, we have about 44 different sounds in our language. So that would be, b, d, ch, k. All of those are sounds. We have other sounds that all around us, but is not in our language. So there's no words that have that sound in it. So 44 are really our speech sounds, and it depends on kind of where you grow up, whether you truly have 44. I live in the South, and I'm pretty sure we have 42 just because of the way Southerners confuse some of their vowel sounds. But technically, the general consensus is that there are 44. So those are phonemes, and phono means sound. So when you have a telephone, that is sound across a long distance, so that's the root. Now, a grapheme is how you represent those sounds. So even though there's only 44 sounds in our language, the graphemes, there's close to 1,200. So the sound I, which is a vowel sound, can be spelled with an I by itself. You know, like in pilot, it could be spelled like IGH, like night. And there's several different graphemes that can be used to represent that sound. So phonemes 44, graphemes close to 1,200. But the most frequent ones, we don't use all the really rare ones too often, so it's not that overwhelming to learn. And then there are morphemes. So when we're teaching language, if we're not including all 3 of these things when we're teaching reading and spelling and writing, then we're really losing an opportunity to expand our vocabulary and to be more efficient in learning about our language. So memorizing 100,000 words is really not efficient when you can learn word parts and learn the meaning of thousands at once. So the first question that I wanted to address from last time is that when we're talking about morphemes and units of meaning, you will have, in our other video, we had like the word kit. And in the word kit, there's only one unit of meaning. People will say, well, look for words within a word to try to figure out the meaning, but that does not work very often, because if we had a kit and we're going to make, an airplane, so we have a model airplane kit, if we try to say that it has some meaning in this word, it doesn't. You have to have all 3 sounds in order to have the meaning of a model airplane kit. Now, if I had more than one kit, and I were to make it plural, then that would be kits, okay? And the thing about that is another morpheme. So that means more than one, and this would be the root. Now, if people try to say, it, then k would have to mean something in isolation, and it doesn't. So when we're looking for morphemes, you have to actually have a reason to back it up, and you have to know what the other part of the word means. And you don't have to know everything about morphemes to look for them. That's the cool part, is that you can look at words and say, I recognize, telegraph and autograph, and maybe a grapheme means writing, because graph means writing. Because if you have autograph, auto means self, and graph is to write. So you can take the bits and pieces of other words that you know and you transfer them to new words, and that's how come it works exponentially. So you can see these relationships. You just have to be careful that you don't transfer the wrong parts of the word. So a word that a lot of kids know the meaning of, as young as kindergarten, they know what a helicopter is. And so if I ask them to tell me what a helicopter was, they would say, oh, it flies in the sky, and airplanes have wings, but helicopters don't. They have propellers. They may not know all the, right terminology for it, but even a kindergartner knows what a helicopter is. Whether they can read and spell it, probably not, but orally, they usually know. So when we look at these words, we think that word is too difficult for kindergarten. It's really not. And the thing about it is, kids understand when you start talking about morphemes. We may not ask them to spell it, we may not ask them to read it, but we can talk about what it means, and they can realize that these word meanings, these morphemes, will transfer into words. So the word helicopter, traditionally what happens in classrooms is people will say, look for word chunks, look for words within those words. And that doesn't really work. When kids don't know about Greek or Latin roots and they haven't been exposed to what morphemes are and what units of meaning are, they're going to go for one-syllable words. Now, most one-syllable words are not Greek or Latin, because Greek or Latin words are multisyllabic, because their prefix will mean something, the root will mean something, the suffix will mean something. And in Anglo-Saxon, a lot of the words that we have that are kind of our irregular words or short words, one-syllable words, Anglo-Saxon, the language is, built kind of for efficiency. So there might be like 25 definitions for the word book, right? But there's only one definition, for a longer word like monosyllabic, something having one syllable. So the language of origin has a lot to do with it. But when you tell them to look for word chunks and they're young, then they're going to think, oh, I'm going to look for a one-syllable word. I'm going to look for a word that I know. So I actually had it happen, when I was teaching this word, I said, well, what do you think the root words are? Even though they knew the meaning of helicopter, what they did is they looked at this and they said, oh, there's cop and like that means like a person who, and then we've got hell. And I literally had a kid say, it means a cop from hell. And I was like, absolutely not. So, and it made me realize how ingrained that is in people to look for those word pieces. But if you're not familiar with what a morpheme is, then you're not going to be looking in the right place. So the thing about helicopter is that there are really two morphemes. And if you study Greek or Latin or are familiar with Greek or Latin morphemes, they are going to tell you what the definition of a word is. So if you know them, you really don't even have to memorize words, because you just look at the word parts and you can figure it out. Because what we have here is we have helico and we have tear, okay? And even though we don't pronounce it helicotere, which sounds fancier than helicopter, but these are the roots, okay? Because sometimes our morphemes don't actually line up with our pronunciation, but that doesn't mean we can't use them to help figure out what the word meaning is, okay? So when we look at this, helico actually means spiral. So, if you have, like a helix, like your DNA, your double helix, that's a spiral. And PTER has to do with flying. So if you have like a pterodactyl, it starts with that PTER. And this means spiral flyer. So it literally defines what a helicopter is. It is, a plane stays on a plane, which is, a geometry term. And then there's helicopter, which is spiral flyer. So, but most people don't even know that those two things exist, which means they're not going to take anything they know from this word and transfer it into other words. Because if they know this is flying, then if you have a pterodactyl, they're going to learn something about ptera and dactyl, and pterodactyl is flying finger, because it kind of looks like one if you've ever seen a pterodactyl. And then a pteropod, which would be like a mollusk that, on the ground of the ocean, they kind of fly around on one foot. And there's a pteropod, pod meaning foot. So if you're a podiatrist, you work with feet. So that's where we start to see the relationship between all these words just exponentially, go crazy for kids, because then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, that could mean this and this could mean that, and their comprehension is going to improve, their reading comprehension, their fluency, their spelling, their ability to get their ideas across. Once you understand that there is a rhyme and a reason behind things, then you start looking for those puzzles. I often describe it as those pictures that you see where you have like an old lady and a young lady and you only see one of them, and then all of a sudden you see both of them, you kind of can't unsee it. Once you understand that these are the puzzle pieces that help to break language like wide open. If we just memorize words, 20 words a week, we're never going to get to the number of words that we need to be able to be successful in life. I mean, they say the bare minimum for being able to make it into college and be successful in college is having 60,000 words in your vocabulary, and 20 words a week, starting in, second or third grade, what are you going to get it to? A couple, I don't know, maybe 1,500? I don't even know. But it's not going to get you anywhere near 60,000. But when we talk about morphemes, That's where we can see the transfer. And a lot of times there are words that are just in our everyday language and we know the meaning so well that we don't even think about what the roots are or how to transfer that into another word. And so, you know, if you're an adult and you own a home, you probably have a mortgage. But people know a mortgage is your monthly payment that you have to pay every month to keep your house, right? But most people don't understand the roots that are involved in here. But if I talk to you about a mortuary, or if somebody was mortal or immortal, you would say, oh yeah, that means death, right? So if you own a home and have a mortgage, you kind of might understand now that mortgage has to do with death. So this actually means death, mort. So that's why it would be immortal, and then immortal would be not mortal, right? And then we have gage over here, which means pledge. So you, in order to get money from the bank, you used to have to give basically your death pledge. If you do not pay the bank back, you will be killed. So it was a death pledge. And we look at it and we think, oh, age is a common suffix. But in this case, it's its own root. So if you had engage, so you get engaged, you've pledged yourself to someone, because that's what that means, right? So we have to look at, you know, so it's kind of like toward pledging with pledging. And that way we're looking at the actual word parts. So I find morphemes absolutely fascinating. I hope you do too, because if you get just a little bit interested, your kids will learn a lot more. So thanks so much for tuning in.